a very famous guest in America and all over the world, Mr. Robert Spencer. Robert Spencer is the editor of the Jihad Watch website. He's a Shellman Fellow at the David Horowitz Center. Robert actually wrote 28 books. Many of them are New York Times bestsellers. So, very famous guy. Also, Robert trained some FBI staff, U.S. command staff, U.S. Army staff on Islam and Jihad. So it's a great honor to welcome Robert today. Welcome, Robert.
To be here. Thank you.
So, Robert, as you know, we discussed previously, I share some of my views. But before I want to go into that, did you ever have a Muslim guy talking to you from a Muslim country before, or this is the first time?
No, there was another one. I'm trying to remember.
Maybe Egypt.
Yeah, I think so. I'm thinking of one that was a guy from Nigeria, but he was not a Muslim.
Oh,
if
yeah,
I
yeah.
recall correctly. And of course, Nigeria is not entirely a Muslim country, at least not yet.
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. This is unusual, and I
Yeah, it
commend
is
you for
unusual.
courage.
I hope that this is going to go viral to show people that even Muslim guys, Muslim people would agree. I may disagree with Robert in some small things, but I would agree with him with most.
Well,
So as I told you, Robert, I started questioning some of the things at a young age. And on the theology side of it, I agree with you in many things. I can see that many conflicts, especially in the Middle East, Islam is being used as a scapegoat, and it's also being used in many countries in politics, and to change people's view of life and of politics in general. I'm lucky that I was raised in Morocco under the leadership of kings who were a bit more open-minded, and we had many Jews who lived in Morocco for a while, and we still have issues in Morocco, but it's a different country. We have a different view of things. I was not raised as an extremist. I was only, and I told you because before we had this interview, you told me, oh, you may get in trouble in Morocco. I started openly supporting the existence of Israel, writing things about Israel a while back, and we still have we have freedom of speech and freedom of thinking here. So, Robert, what I want to focus with you on today, as I told you, we want to focus a bit on what's going on in Israel and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and how you think it's not going to be solved anytime soon with politics, because most of it is it's a lot of people, especially on the other side, who would view it as a religious war.
Absolutely. Yeah. You read what Hamas puts out in their statements, their explanations of what they're doing, their calls for support. Read Palestinian Islamic Jihad, even material from the Palestinian Authority itself. Islam is always the center of the conflict. It's always framed in Islamic terms. And yet you turn around and read the United Nations, the European Union, and the US State Department about the conflict, and there's one thing that's conspicuously never mentioned at all, ever, in any way, shape, or form as having anything to do with the conflict, and that's Islam. And I suggest that this is one reason why all the negotiated settlements that have come out of the State Department and the global human rights apparatus have failed, and why they're all doomed to fail, because they don't address the problem at its roots. They don't deal with the real reason for the conflict. They ignore the real reason for the conflict, and so they can never hope to fix it.
Yeah, you're right. So we can see that at some point after you've been talking about this in some of your books and some of your your interviews after the after the breakdown of the Ottoman Empire, they were said there was regionally in the Middle East there were some pan Arabism that we can call it pan Arabism, which was kind of secular that did not actually work, and we can see that Islamization of societies came in, politicization of Islam. Uh, can we talk about the role of Saudi Arabia at that time
Saudi
and
Arabia
Wahhabism?
played a very big role in the destruction of Arab nationalism. Arab nationalism is, as you noted, a post World War I movement that came out of the ashes of the Ottoman Empire. And it arose in the first place from the Arabs who had always challenged Ottoman rule even before the empire fell, going back to the Wahhabis starting in the 18th century. But after the fall of the empire, when Ataturk in Turkey was saying the reason why the empire fell was because of Islam, the immoral theology of the dead theology of an immoral Bedouin, he said, and he rejected political Islam as the basis for the government of Turkey, created secularism in Turkey, which of course is now on its way out. And in the Arab world, there was a similar movement that the Arab states would come together, and the Arab peoples in general would come together on the basis of their shared Arabiya, their shared Arabic identity, and it would not be based on Islam. If the Christian Arabs would be included. As a matter of fact, of course, this movement, to a tremendous degree, was spearheaded by the Christian Arabs. And so it was the basis for the movements that put Saddam Hussein and the Assads in power. And it's at a time of the end of the 20th century, it seemed as if Arab nationalism was the wave of the future, and that secularism would continue to spread in the Arab world and in the Islamic world in general. But the Saudis were meanwhile making a contrary motion and spreading Wahhabi Islam all around the world, trying especially to work against the areas where the Arabs had secularized.
And also
And
against Iran.
bring them back to the religion, saying, you're angering Allah, you're acting against the commands of Allah, you are bringing destruction upon your countries unless you return to the path of Allah. And this ultimately prevailed, so that now we see Arab nationalism is more of a matter of history than of present day reality, and Islam is resurgent in the Islamic world. This is largely the handiwork of the Saudis.
Yeah, it is. They did heavy work, and Muslim populations all over the world they still can't grasp the danger of the Saudis. Right now, I've been reading some articles. Other than what Qatar was using, there's a new word that we call sports washing. It's using, for example, sponsorship of sports and sports teams that Qatar was using also. Qatar, the terrorist country, terrorist organization that I call, how the hell can a country host a bunch of terrorists such as Hamas? Then they buy teams in Europe, they sponsor. So this is a new word, and Saudi is doing the same thing. You heard about the Golf League,
Yes.
and they also invited the Trump to it and the different golf champions. So Saudi Arabia is doing a big game right now, tricking people into believing that they changed. A couple of weeks ago, thousands of pilgrims died in Saudi Arabia. How can a single country control one of the pillars of Islam? I was thinking about this for the last couple of months, trying to write an article about it, analyzing how this country cannot. They actually take in millions of dollars, even probably billions of dollars from this pilgrimage every year, other than the income that they have from oil and other things, but they still cannot help other countries, maybe even their own people. If you go from outside of Mecca and the Medina, you'll see poverty in Saudi Arabia. You'll see people who are homeless. That's what I heard. I've never been in Saudi Arabia. But I'm trying to attack Saudi Arabia. Maybe I'll end up like Khashoggi at some point. You
I
never
hope.
know.
But the thing about Saudi Arabia, the sports washing, they're imitating the communist Chinese. Because look how the communist Chinese bought the National Basketball Association. And so now you have the NBA working in China, spreading basketball in China. That's fine, no problem there. But then when the big stars of the NBA in the United States are asked, what do you think about China? They refuse to criticize it. And so China has this tremendous legitimacy that it bought by buying the NBA. It's the same thing now that the Saudis are trying to do with the PGA and the golfers, that they buy a legitimacy in the West.
The problem right now is that the American media is not talking about this. A lot of people are not discussing this, and this is a danger. Same thing, I'm going to come back to the Islamization of America and its campuses with the financing of Qatar. I'll come back to that. Qatar is doing many other crazy things in America other than what the Saudis are doing. And these things need to be discussed with the American people, with the Western world. This is something that's been done. Post-COVID, people are still struggling with the rise of prices. People are confused. Elections are coming in America, but media need to talk about this. So I want to go back again to Saudi Arabia and Iran. What do you think about the Iran role and its use of Islam to spread its violence using its proxies? You know, we have at least four four proxies that I know of: Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis in Yemen. And we also, I believe, we have a proxy of Iran here in Morocco, which is the Polisario Front, who are being giving us a hard time here in our southern region of Morocco, which is the Moroccan Sahara. But they've been even Iran is trying to take over. I don't know what they're trying to do, even in Africa, and attacking Sunni Muslim countries such as Morocco.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be at all surprised if that were the case. A few years back, the Iranian regime was discovered to be financing a Marxist party in Spain. And they were just trying to destabilize the society, which they hope will work to their interests in the long term. But actually, it's the same thing. We were talking about Saudi Arabia and its role in defeating Arab nationalism. The Iranians also played a large role in this, even though they're Shiite. With the Iranian Revolution, they showed the Islamists that they had the ability to take over a state, even a highly functioning, respected state as the Iranian regime was under the Shah, and Islamize it and rule by Sharia. And so they gave a tremendous impetus to the Islamic movement, both in the Sunni world as well as the Shia.
Well, do you think is there another danger from the Shia, where it's? I know that you think all the sects are the same, but do you think is there another danger coming from Iran?
Well, the Iranians want to rule the Islamic world, but they have a big disadvantage because they're Shiite. And so they're only 15% of the Islamic world, and the Sunnis don't want to be ruled by Shia. But the Iranians are working this out very systematically. They have Iraq, and George W. Bush gave them Iraq because he toppled Saddam Hussein, and then he put in elections, and the elections, it was inevitable. The Shiites would vote for Shia, and the Sunnis would vote for Sunni, and so the Iraqis, because it's 55% Shiite, instituted a Shiite government in Baghdad, and then that became a satellite of Iran. So they got Iraq. In Lebanon, of course, they've been moving in people, and they have Hezbollah. And so they have this historically Christian area that is now probably majority Shiite because they have been systematically targeting it and bringing people in. In Syria, the Alawites rule, and the Alawites are beholden to the Shiites because the Shiite mullahs gave them a certification that they were genuinely Islamic. Otherwise, they probably would have been toppled already. And so they've got this whole area, and it wouldn't take much, really. Obviously the big obstacles are Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and Turkey to a lesser degree because it's a little bit out of this particular region. But nonetheless, this is a tremendous group of a tremendous expanse of territory that the Iranians already have a tremendous degree of control over. And so it's not so fanciful anymore that they could become the rulers of the Islamic world.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, we come back to the people, like the Muslim people. How, I mean, many people from that region are undereducated, underemployed. Maybe if they're employed, they're underemployed. There's poverty. There's so they're easy to control. Let's go back a bit to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and these two countries. How do you see them getting involved? I did an interview. I was in Israel. I did an interview with ILTV, which is part of the Ynet group, where I spoke about at that point there was a potential normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and I actually, in my interview, I discussed the potential normalization and how I actually suggested to Israel and the Israeli politicians to be careful about what the Saudis would want, because Saudis, again, they see themselves as the protector of Islam and Islamic
Yeah.
sites, and that would be a dangerous step for Israeli politicians to give them whatever they want, especially controlling some part of the Temple Mount, the Islamic sites and things like that. So, how do you see both? Let's start with Saudi Arabia and Iran getting involved in this conflict.
Well, the Saudis are in a difficult position when it comes to the conflict because they're threatened by Iran. And so the Trump administration and then the Biden administration also has been trying to get them to come to an accord with Israel, like the Abraham Accords. If not join the Abraham Accords formally, at least come to some accord with Israel, because the Abraham Accords are built on the idea that the Sunni states have a shared threat with Israel, that a shared threat from Iran, that they can get together with Israel to try to counter, because Israel's threatened by Iran, Bahrain and the rest of them are also threatened by Iran, so they can get together on that basis. The Saudis also are threatened by Iran. And so that was the idea behind the accord. The problem is that now, especially since the war has broken out, ever since the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, the Saudis can't come to an accord with Israel because it would look as if they're betraying the entire Islamic nation. The entire Ummah is being betrayed. And they're the custodians of the two holy places, this would play very badly. So there's not going to be any accord right now, and any talk of it now, it's just fantasy.
What about Iran? Do you think I had this? I was doing this analysis, just thinking about this. I was like, wouldn't Iran want to get rid of its proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah? Because they want to probably move on at some point.
Why?
As an Iranian state.
You mean just attack Israel directly?
No, like maybe they're not gonna be supporting them anymore. They just want to get rid of all these things. Maybe you never know who's. Maybe if Trump is coming next, I don't think this is gonna work for them. But if a crazy Democrat again, such as maybe Obama or something like that, maybe they'll make a deal again, or you never know. But I was just thinking about this. What do you think?
Well, there's no way. I don't think that Iran is going to get rid of its proxies. It's not going to moderate, even if Trump does become president again. Because remember how they were very antagonistic toward Trump while he was president before. And the idea that they would be pacified, I think, is out of the question. However, it is possible that they will be less belligerent, although probably very hostile in terms of rhetoric, but less belligerent because they know that Trump is not to be trifled with the way that Biden is. And so they might become more restrained in their actions and not cut loose the proxies, but fund them less. Also, of course, they always have to balance the funding with the shakiness of their own regime. and how it's very telling how the demonstrators in Iran last year were shouting many times. We saw this on many videos. Them shouting, "We don't care about Palestine." That they should stop, in other words, funding Hamas and Hezbollah and use the money for the people of Iran.
Yeah.
And so this is something that may come back again to haunt them.
Yeah, and this is what I just said. It's gonna at some point it's gonna come. The words
Yes.
and the actions will come to the people. People will at some point. I may not. We may not even be here, but you never know what's gonna happen next. I see people. Maybe people will be more educated, maybe more critical thinkers and things like that. But at some point, I don't see this is going anywhere without. The people making their own decisions because people are sick of leaders who are making. So Iran, you have 90 million people there, and I don't think most of them are agreeing with whatever their government is doing.
You know, it's astonishing. Did you see the poll, the survey from last year, that only 40% of Iranians identified as Muslim anymore?
Yeah.
And officially, of course, Iran is 99% Muslim, but all those people are just so disenchanted. After
And you know why?
Islamic
You know why?
Mhm.
And I'll explain this because we may have this even in North Africa now. Because you see all these bad deeds that their Muslim leaders are doing, bad deeds that politicians are doing. So they'll be like, they're not going to change their religion. They'll probably become atheists or deists, as they became at some point. So you never know. I mean, when you're a critical thinker, you'll be like, what the hell is going on?
Exactly.
What is this religion where you have a lot of corruption, you have a lot of people killing each other, especially in that side of the world.
Mhm.
So of course you're going to be thinking twice about staying as a Muslim. So let's go back to let's move a bit to the Western world now and the spread of Islamism. So as I told you, here in Morocco, we're close to Europe, and I've seen and I heard in the news and things how Islamism and the spread of Islamism especially in France and the UK. You've been banned from the UK for your for your for your ideologies. You're free. I mean, you're not a violent person. You just spread an ideology and a way of thinking that I trust is something logical.
They
And
said
you've
that
been banned.
they said that I was banned for saying Islam is not a religion of peace.
Yeah,
So
I heard. Yeah, you
I'm
said
saying water is wet.
Islam is obedience, right? That's what you said.
Submission.
Submission, yeah, something like that. Yeah, I heard that. So, and you can see, the UK is considered one of the democratic countries of the world, and they've been trapped in getting all those not controlling. I mean, I'm not talking about getting immigrants in. That's a different issue. The control of immigration and Muslim immigration. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is the control of the spread of Islamism and the hateful speech, extreme and violent acts, and things like that. I was in the UK. I actually studied there back in 2011, and I've seen the hateful. I mean, I was called a Paki. Like some white guys called me a Paki because they thought I was a Pakistani or something. So there is some. You can see that there's a kind of a pressure, social pressure between different people, and the UK has been having issues with this, with the spread of. You've been having I can't remember his name. This Egyptian cleric who was he had his eye taken off during the Afghani war, who was giving speeches inside London. Abu Hamza, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the UK or their intelligence services were trying to play with all bringing all those people in, but that actually brought a lot of issues. France, with all the attacks that they actually Morocco, with the coordination with some Moroccan services, they actually were helping, and actually they're helping France right now with their upcoming Olympic Games. Morocco has a long experience with uh, terror and terrorists. Uh, so I wrote an article, I think last month, with the think tank Middle East Forum, where I did a small research piece about a mosque in Michigan who eulogized a Hezbollah martyr who was killed, executed by the Israelis inside Lebanon. So I was actually the first. First, I think I read that news in your newsletter.
Hmm.
I did some more research about it. Talked to some experts back in Tel Aviv here in the U.S. No response from that mosque. Uh, those kind of things actually scare me, even though I don't live in the U.S. But those kind of things may go to something else. How the hell can you believe that a mosque inside the U.S. is eulogizing, and they actually got financing from the states and the federal government, different grants. So this is just a case that I talked about. Many other cases are happening. Another thing I saw was a Qatari funded. I'm not talking now about Ivy League campuses that are funded by by the Qataris and funding hate against the Jews and the Israelis. I'm talking now about I think it was either the elementary or high school system where they had an Arabic culture class, and they did not have the Israeli flag. Instead, they had Palestine. And this class was in New York, I think, and it was funded by the state of Qatar, terrorist state of Qatar. That's what I called it. So, how do you see this the spread of Islamism in the Western world and in America in general?
It's spreading very rapidly, and it's spreading without anybody realizing what it is, because one of the first things that the people who are spreading it did was make sure that nobody would talk about it by stigmatizing and demonizing anybody who did talk about it as racist, bigoted, and Islamophobic. And so all
No,
the
you have Muslims talking about it.
yes, that's right. So nobody is able to talk about it. Nobody even is able to say that there's any question about it or any problem at all. That if Qatar is pouring money into American universities, no problem. If the American universities have the students agitating for Hamas, no problem. Because to say otherwise would be Islamophobic and racist. So it just goes on, and it's going to get much worse.
Okay, so at at the end of our show, Robert, thanks again for coming. You're a great guest, and thank you for accepting my invitation. Let's just talk a bit about the solutions. How do you see? We said that personally, I think that this Israeli-Palestinian conflict would never end as long as there's
That's right.
religion coming into it. It's never going to end, even with the greatest politicians of the world. So, how do you see this conflict ending? And do you have any solutions for the Islamization of America and the Western world?
Well, it is a religious conflict, as we discussed at the beginning. And so, as long as there are believers in Muhammad and the Quran and Allah, there's going to be people waging jihad against Israel because they believe that it's Islamic land and they have to drive out the people who have driven them out, as the Quran says. And so, even though the Israelis didn't really drive them out, that's what they're told. So they think they have the command from Allah, they have to fight. So as long as there are believers, there will be jihad against Israel. All that Israel can do is stand strong. One major thing it could do was reject the idea of Palestinians. Should never have accepted of them at all. The Palestinians are an invented nationality. You never hear about them in history. They never existed until the 1960s. Jimmy Carter and Anwar Sadat forced Begin, the prime minister of Israel, to accept their existence at the Camp David Accords in the 1970s. The Israelis need to repudiate them, to emphasize that they are Arabs who are no different linguistically culturally, ethnically, religiously from the Arabs in Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. And that Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan need to step up and allow them to be citizens there. And then if they had done that from the beginning, there never would have been a problem.
Yeah. Well, what about the the spread of Islamism, Robert? How
In
can we
the
solve that?
United States, yes. The big problem is mass migration. And there again, you're called a racist or an Islamophobe or a bigot if you say that it's not a good idea. But it's not a good idea because you have people coming in who believe that their culture and their way of life is superior. And so they will never assimilate and accept the culture and way of life of the people who are already here. So we can either become an Islamic state eventually, or we have to stop the mass migration. If we stop the mass migration, then also we have to enforce the existing laws here. Right now, people are too afraid. They're, once again, here it's always the same thing. They're afraid of being called racist. So, for example, it's against the law to be polygamous, but there are many Muslims who are polygamous in the United States, and the law is not enforced because
Add to that the woke. Add to that the woke.
yes.
Wokeism.
So
Wokeism is making that worse, right?
that's right. We have to recover the idea that there's one set of laws that applies to everyone, and that would be a big help to start to roll this back. But instead, these parallel societies are being set up. It's only going to grow, and there's going to be strife in the future as a result.
All right. Well, thank you, Robert. Robert Spencer again.
Thank you.
Great to have you.
Good talking to you. Thank